Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Council of the Municipality of North Perth held on Monday, January 6, 2020. Welcome back. I'm Mayor Todd Kasenberg and I'll call the meeting to order. I ask the Deputy Clerk to note a starting time for the minutes as 7 p.m. I invite you at this time to rise for the playing of O Canada. Today's meeting is being streamed live on the Municipality of North Perth YouTube channel and will be available there after the meeting as an archived video. To those present in the gallery today, by attending a public meeting of the Council, you are consenting to your image, voice, and comments being recorded. Anyone who is invited to speak will be recorded and their voice, image, and comments will form part of the live stream. The chair and/or the clerk have the discretion and authority at any time to direct the termination or interruption of live streaming. Such direction will only be given in exceptional circumstances where deemed relevant. Circumstances may include instances where the content of debate is considered misleading, defamatory, or potentially inappropriate to be published. Attendees are advised that they may be subject to legal action if their actions result in inappropriate and/or unacceptable behavior and/or comments. Thank you. Now, this community succeeds and flourishes when its people make their contributions. Those making important contributions include councillors at this table who are back and full of vim and vigor for 2020 and who will listen to and deliberate on the matters on our proposed agenda. This council has been very well supported by dedicated members of the staff of North Perth who provide service and reports to this council and to our community, and those who have business with or interest in the work of this council. I appreciate all of you being here and your service. I invite your decorum over the course of the coming meeting. Since our work does require concentration, procedures issued by council requires all but councillors and specific media to turn off electronic communication devices at this time, and even then to respect focused use for our meeting. Use of cameras or audio devices during or to record this meeting is not permitted. Let us move then to item 2.1 on our agenda pertaining to pecuniary interest. For the benefit of those unfamiliar with our council practices, provincial legislation requires councillors with a potential pecuniary or financial interest in any item at the council table to declare this interest and to remove her or himself from discussions and voting on the item. In accordance with recommended protocol, at this time, I invite all councillors with pecuniary interest, including those who have so declared in writing, to verbally advise the chair in public session and to submit documentation, if not already submitted, to this effect in writing to the clerk. Councillors, your declarations, if any. Councillor Behrens?
Thank you, Mayor Kasenberg. I would declare a conflict on 5.4.1, the accounts, specifically the daycare accounts, as I have grandchildren that attend the North Perth Spinrite Child and Family Center, and subsequent to that, 13.1, the confirmatory.
Thank you, Councillor Behrens. Deputy Mayor Kellum?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Kasenberg. I would also like to declare a conflict of interest on item 5.4.1 with regards to the Perth Metals accounts, as my mother and father-in-law are tenants, as well 13.1, the confirmatory bylaw.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And Councillor Johnston.
Item 4.2, the Gilkinson Municipal Drain. I am an officer of a corporation that leases land in North Perth that's affected by that drain. I'm also officer of a corporation that owns land in Perth East that is affected by that. So it will also be 13.1, the confirmatory.
Very good. Thank you, Councillor Johnston. Any further notes on pecuniary interest declarations? Councillors, as you know, should you find yourself encountering one during our meeting, you are welcome to declare at that point or at any time. Let's turn then to item 2.2 of our agenda. At this time, I have a motion before me for the adoption of the agenda for tonight's meeting that reads as follows. Let me just make sure that my inputs are right here. Okay, it's okay. The resolution for our consideration is that the agenda for tonight's meeting be approved. Can I invite a mover for that? Councillor Johnston, and seconded by Councillor Seiler. Any discussion or debate? Let's have that vote, please. And Councillor Richardson is in favor. And that is carried. I believe that's everyone. All right, that brings us to item 3 on our agenda, the so-called consent agenda. These items are placed on our agenda because they are believed to be non-contentious, yet they require council's approval. Grouping them expedites our business. However, any councillor wishing to extract an item from the consent agenda for discussion, debate, and individual action may do so. There are 3 items on our consent agenda tonight, including the minutes of the last regular council meeting. Councillors, do any of you have a desire to extract any of these items for further discussion? Seeing no indication of that, let's consider the motion before us that consent items 3.1 to 3.3 be received for information and the minutes of the December 16th, 2019 regular council meeting be adopted. Could I invite a mover for that? Councillor Rothwell, thank you, and Councillor Anstead as our seconder. Any discussion or debate? Seeing none, let's have that vote. And that is carried. Thank you. At this time, it's proposed that we move to agenda item number 4. We have included on tonight's agenda 2 public meetings, one related to a land planning matter and the second associated with a municipal drain. To facilitate the public meetings, we must temporarily adjourn from our regular council meeting. I have before me a motion to make that happen that reads as follows: that the Council of the Municipality of North Perth adjourns at 7:07 p.m. for the purpose of public meetings under the Planning Act and Drainage Act concerning 1, an application for site plan control by 245-9825 Ontario Inc., and 2, the Gilkinson Municipal Drain Realignment 2019 report. Can I invite a mover for that? Deputy Mayor Kellum, thank you, and seconded by Councillor Andreessen. Any discussion or debate? Let's have that vote. And that is carried, which means we are temporarily adjourned for the purpose of public meetings. For those who are in attendance, welcome to a public meeting pursuant to the Municipality of North Perth's policy regarding proposed site plans. The purpose of this meeting is to consider site plans under Section 41 of the Planning Act, RSO 1990. It is the responsibility of council to decide if the application is to be approved or denied. Those in attendance wishing to make comment concerning this application will be given an opportunity to do so. Those who want to receive notice of the municipality's decision concerning this application are asked to sign the sheet that is available on the table at the back of this room, giving their mailing address and telephone number. At this time, I'm going to call on North Perth Planner Sean Yilmaz for a summary of this application. Welcome, Sean. Press the button. There we go.
Thank you, and good evening, Mayor Kaysenberg, members of Council, and Happy New Year. The site plan application before Council tonight has been submitted by numbered company 2459825 Ontario Incorporated and applies to land located at Lot 7 of Plan 44M61 in the Listowel Ward and is located on the east side of Wallace Avenue South. The property is just north of the North Perth Fire Service Station. The property owner is seeking council approval to construct one fourplex dwelling on the subject property. The property has a total lot area of approximately 770.5 square meters or 8,300 square feet and was recently granted relief for a deficient lot frontage of 19.7 meters where 20 meters is normally required. The lot is currently vacant. The subject property is within the residential designation of the Listowel Ward official plan and is within the residential 4 zone of the North Perth zoning bylaw, both of which permit fourplex dwellings. The municipality's chief building official, fire chief, public works, engineering consultant, and the North Perth planner have reviewed the site plan drawings. Adequate parking, access, fire protection, waste storage, lot grading, and drainage are provided for the development. It is staff's recommendation that the council proceed with the adoption of the bylaw authorizing the mayor and clerk to enter into a site plan agreement and to have it registered on title. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yilmaz. I'll direct now to the clerk. Can you provide us with information about the notice of public meeting details?
Notice inviting persons to the public meeting were mailed on December 24th, 2019 by first-class mail to landowners within 60 meters of the subject property.
Thank you. And further to the clerk, any correspondence, comments, or reports that have been received to date?
No correspondence has been received.
Thank you. Okay, at this time, there's the opportunity for comments. First, we invite those who wish to make comment on the application or details of the site plan who are not the applicant. You may do so at this time. Seeing no indication of interest in that opportunity, the applicant or the applicant's agent may approach at this point to provide any comments or information. Okay, seeing no one present on that front either. At this time, councillors, do you have any comments or questions that you'd like to address? Okay. So that brings us to the conclusion of this meeting. I will note that notice of the decision by council will be given in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act. Council's decision is subject to appeal to the local planning appeal tribunal only by the property owner applicant in accordance with the provisions of section 41 subsection 12 of the Planning Act RSO 1990. And that brings to a close that meeting. Next up, we have a public meeting for the consideration of the report for the Gilkinson Municipal Drain Realignment 2019. And I'll ask the clerk to note Councillor Johnston's withdrawal from the room at this time. So those who have joined us for this matter, I welcome you to this opportunity to consider this report. And first up, I believe, we'll invite someone from the consultant, Jeremy Taylor, from R.J. Burnside and Associates, to present the report. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. So tonight we have the Gilkinson Municipal Drain Realignment 2019 report in front of you. I'm going to give a brief overview of the report and some of the details within it. The drawing for the plan view of the main portion of the drain that's affected by this report is up on the TV screens. The report was initiated by a request for improvement that was submitted by the landowner of Lot 21 and 22, Concession 13 in the Alma Ward, Mr. Murray Kunze. At the time, he requested either a repair or an improvement to the crossing that is located in Lot 21 on his property. Lot 21. Or potential to relocate the channel that is on his property. As you can see from the plan view that's on the TV screens, the drain currently bisects the Lot 21 property starting in the north east corner and traveling down to the southwest corner, north being to the top of the page. There's a crossing on the drain near the south portion of Mr. Kunze's property. The Gilkinson drain is a fairly large drain. It's about 4,000 hectares or about 10,000 acres upstream of this point. And this is close to the very downstream end of the Gilkinson drain. It continues down through line 66, which is just at the bottom of the screen there, and a couple hundred meters further before it empties into the Boyle drain. The channel is a fairly big channel. It's about 3 to 4 meters wide at the base and about 2 meters plus in depth. So you can picture a fairly significant channel that's bisecting Mr. Kunze's property here. The drain was originally updated last in 1983, and a copy of that drawing has been included in the report for reference. It shows the entire watershed. With the request for improvement, we had an initial on-site meeting in May of 2014, a subsequent a landowner information meeting in December of 2018. We also had a couple meetings with the landowner that was primarily affected by this property, Mr. Kunze, including one in March of 2018. Through those meetings and through the discussions with the landowner, we came to the conclusion that he preferred to relocate the drain to the outside edges of the property rather than bisecting it, and rather than replacing the existing crossing that was in need of repair. So the proposed solution that was put forth is to relocate the drain to the north and west property boundary on Lot 21, and then reconnect it at the downstream end of Mr. Kunze's property. Because of the size of the channel, there was a number of requirements from DFO that were required with the loss of fish habitat, as they deemed it, for the channel through the property, even though the actual length of channel that is going to be created out of this is longer than the existing. And as part of the Fisheries Act process, an authorization for the work was required from DFO, which included a letter of credit and some specific measures to be followed. A permit from Maitland Valley Conservation Authority was also obtained, and copies of both approvals and authorizations are included within the report. The proposed solution is a deepening of the channel downstream of the property for about 340 meters. This is providing additional depth of outlet for the property, but also for the entire watershed. Then the channel will be relocated at approximately 830 meters on the west property line and approximately 470 meters on the north property line. Should point out that there is an existing channel on the west property line right now called the Danbrook Municipal Drain, and that's a sub-watershed of the Gilkinson. That channel is significantly smaller than the Gilkinson now, so it's going to be enlarged. And then as part of the report, the Danbrook Drain will now end at the north property line on lot between concession 13 and 12, instead of at the point right down into concession 13. The drain design incorporates a number of the DFO requirements, which include sediment basins, meandering pools, substrate replacement, some plantings, sod matting along the side, and buffer strips for the new channel. There's a 90-degree bend in the new channel, so it has been armored, similar to what another 90-degree bend is further upstream within the Gilkinson drain. And all the spoil that's being excavated for the new channel will be used to fill in the existing, all the spoil that's been excavated for the new channel will be used to fill the old channel. Mixed up there. Overall costs for the report are $408,500 is the estimate right now contained within it. Construction costs are estimated at $231,000. Allowances of $36,000 are included. Engineering is at $78,000, which includes the construction inspection. There's also a DFO requirement that we took out of the total estimate, which dealt with getting the DFO authorization. One of the requirements as well with the DFO is to do a post-construction monitoring report. Cost for that and the approval process are $32,000. And then the admin and sundry costs that we included, as well as some contingency, is estimated at $29,900. I mentioned the size of the watershed of about 4,000 hectares. There's about 170 different, or over 170 different roll numbers associated with this drain report. So as part of the process, instead of a report being mailed to all the landowners within the watershed, a brief summary letter as well as an invite to this meeting was sent out, and the schedule of assessments, which is included in the report as Appendix D. Within that letter, it was indicated some of the assessment logic, brief summary overview of it. As well, it was indicated that a copy of the report would be available upon request to the municipality's clerk, and I believe at this time no one within the watershed other than the main landowners surrounding drain have requested a report. Our drain format, or the report format, follows a similar format that we do with most of our drains, with the appendices taking out some of the main points, such as the cost estimate, the allowances, the assessments. The construction specifications are also included in the appendix. As I mentioned earlier, the environmental requirements of DFO and the Conservation Authority approvals are within the appendix, and then the drawings, which are up on the television screen here, are also included.
Thank you, Jeremy. At this time, if you don't mind, you can take a seat. If you don't, let's turn to those who are here for the purposes of this meeting and invite you to ask your questions of the engineer and the report. And also council will have the opportunity to ask questions as well. So if you'll come forward, state your name and your address in terms of setting the record, and then we'll entertain your questions and concerns. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. My name is John Quincy. I'm Murray Quincy's brother. And this is Murray's first foray into a municipal drain. So it was all kind of new for him. And some of you may know me around the table. I've been a drainage engineer for 42 years. So I kind of understand what's going on. And I had worked with Murray from day one when he first had a contractor out to look at the project and figure out what was going on. And I finally recommend that he go the engineer's route, get an engineer's report. Certainly was required for what he wanted to undertake. But on behalf of Murray, I do have some questions that I would like to address to the engineer through council. If I could, and I'll try to be as brief as I can. So the first deals with sort of the general design of the work that's proposed, and I think Jeremy Taylor identified that there was indication that work was required upstream and downstream of my brother's property, along with work on Murray's property. And the two questions I have relate to that. First off, it says twice in the report that Mr. Voskamp asked for the drain to be cleaned out through his property, and I see no indication in the report that that is going to be done. And not that we're really concerned whether it gets cleaned out on that property, but the one thing I find in the report is that there is a 1 foot difference in elevation at the north limits of Murray's property before it goes into the Voskamp property, and the report doesn't seem to deal with that. And I'm assuming you're not going to leave like an abrupt waterfall at that point. So that would be my first question, and I'm in your hands, your worship, whether you want me to do all of the questions or do you want him to answer them?
I think perhaps my question is, how many questions do you have? And that way I'll decide how we're going to facilitate this. Do you have a number more?
Sorry, the first two are grouped together. So
okay, so why don't we have those two?
Yeah, and the second question is, I think, more significant and more important because it does impact on Murray's property. But it's mentioned on page 9 of the report that at a public information meeting on December the 6th, the landowners indicated that they felt there was a blockage in the channel downstream of my brother's property. And the report now proposes to clean the channel out, like to reduce the grade, which is something that my brother had been asking for or is needed to get it below the tile outlets on the property. But I have a concern with the cross sections. If you look on drawing number 3, the channel, and Jeremy Teller mentioned this in his opening remarks, the channel is going to be 3 meters wide, have a bottom width of 3 meters. Starting where it enters on my brother's property, goes up along the Danbrook property, and then across the back. But when you look at the 3 cross sections downstream of that point, the channel only has a 0.5 meter bottom. And I don't know how you squeeze a channel that's got a 3 meter wide bottom into a channel that's only half a meter wide in the bottom. And that's the blockage that the owners are concerned about, and my brother is concerned about, because he's always felt that the drain downstream of his property is much narrower than it is on his property, where there's like this huge wide channel. And that was the whole purpose of this exercise, was to, deal with this crossing and deal with this realignment, but also to make sure that there was a good outlet downstream. And we really feel that that's an issue that, should be addressed. We don't want to have to go all the way to the Drainage Tribunal to argue something like that, that if the engineer could make a change to his report to accommodate that, and I don't know whether it can be done at time of construction or whether you have to modify the report. But we feel that there isn't going to be sufficient capacity in the channel downstream.
Okay, so did we want Mr. Taylor to address those first 2 questions, perhaps?
So to answer the downstream part first, because I think that's a more straightforward answer. In the report, it did mention a blockage. The blockage I was referring to in the report was at the or the bridge crossing, where there was a buildup of sediment. That's what I was referring to with regards to the blockage in it. And with regards to the width of the channel, I'm just looking at the drawing here now. It does show it coming to a V point in that downstream section. When we surveyed the channel, our focus of the survey was really within Mr. Kunze's property, so that's where a lot more detail was gathered with it. When we went back and looked at the downstream edge, we didn't gather up bank edge to bank edge as well. So the cross-section shown there probably is not as indicative of what's there. Our plan is not to have it in a V shape. We plan to take out a bottom width that we need to take for it, and the width that is there along the bottom width is, in my opinion, more representative of a 3 meter bottom width channel. Okay. With regards to upstream, Mr. Voss, the comment about Mr. Voskamp, when we walked the channel in, get my dates right here, in late 2018, we walked from the upstream line down through to line 66 and walked Mr. Voskamp's property. We noticed a couple spots where there was a bit of sediment accumulation, but generally the water was flowing well through it until we got to the relocation property of concession 13, lot 22 and 21. With what's on the report or in the drawings, no, we do not plan to leave it as a waterfall. In fact, we tend to blend it in, but we did not see or feel that a clean out continuing all the way up to the next concession line was required as part of the works. If we find once the work is done that there's a couple spots where there's sediment buildup, the clean out, we'd look at addressing it. We felt would be the better way is doing it through maintenance and spot clean out. One of the things that we struggled with this drain was dealing with DFO through the process of it. And so when there was a change and additional work added to it, we felt that the best way to deal with anything beyond the areas that we were working with was through maintenance and a simplified clean out at that point.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so would it be possible then, Jeremy, to get the actual cross sections of what is going to be downstream so we can be assured that the channel upstream is going to have sufficient outlet? Like, would you be able to provide more detailed cross sections if you're saying the ones in the drawings aren't correct?
I believe I would be able to get a more detailed cross section. If that's something that would be needed.
Because as I say, we have a great concern that the work that's being proposed isn't going to have sufficient outlet with the channel that's there. The last one, I'm just going to raise as a comment and ask Jeremy Taylor to discuss this further with my brother in the future. It wouldn't require a change to the engineer's report. But there's an item in the specifications about stripping topsoil. My brother isn't convinced that the amount of topsoil stripping that's called for is going to be required. And he would just like to be consulted prior to it being put out to tender to just work out a little bit more detail on where exactly the topsoil stripping is going to take place. One impression we had was that you're going to strip topsoil along the entire length of the drain to be backfilled. And we don't think there's a whole lot of good topsoil there because that's the old ditch bank. That's where all the material was spread out every time it was cleaned out. But anyways, that one doesn't require any further comment at this stage. I just wanted Jeremy to be aware of that. And then my concluding comments are going to relate to Department of Fisheries and Oceans. And I'm fully aware, as Jeremy has indicated, I experienced it numerous times in my career as well, that you can't do a project like this unless you get approval from Fisheries and Oceans. Sometimes I find it a little puzzling why the Federal Department of Fisheries and Oceans is out in North Perth looking at ditches, but that's a fact of life. We need to deal with that. So the first thing they required was a 3-meter buffer strip. Again, we're comfortable with the 3-meter buffer strips. It's a fairly common thing to do on drains. But again, a comment through to yourself, Jeremy. I found it a little difficult in the report to figure out exactly where the buffer strips were. They only really show up in the one detail on drawing number 1. And I would suggest that for construction purposes, and if you could provide it for myself and my brother, if the cross-section drawings would show the location of the buffer strip and also show the offset of the channel at the north end of the property so that everybody is aware when they go to construct it that it's to be 3 meters away from the fence and not right next to the fence. So if that detail could be added to the cross-sections, it would work. Now, one other request I would like to make with request to that, though, before we can draw a final conclusion on the buffer strips, is whether you would be able to provide Murray and myself with the detailed calculations for the allowances for right-of-way. That shows your area calculations. Would you be able to provide that information? Yes. Yes, okay. The next 2 items that DFO required are these things called meander pools. As engineers, we always want to dig trapezoidal channels in a straight line, and that's not what is good for fisheries, so they want to make things meander. We don't have any problem with that. I think it's required. It seems to fit within the cross-section that's there. They're also going to try to plant shrubs all along the bank of the ditch again. Not sure exactly what that's going to accomplish, but the next time it's cleaned out, they may all be gone. But again, if that's something that needs to be done, that's fine. The last 2, though, are the ones that I'm a little bit concerned about. This concept of taking the sod from the field and placing it on the bank of the ditch as you're building it. I'm just not too sure how that's going to work out. And the question I was going to ask Jeremy is, has that been done before? Have you done projects where you take the sod? Because we're talking a ditch bank slope at 2 to 1. And I don't think a landscaper or anybody would try to lay sod on that type of a slope, even staking it in place. It's very, very steep that as soon as it gets wet or there's a flow of water, I think all of that topsoil and sod is just going to slide down into the bottom of the ditch and either have to be cleaned out or hauled away. So we just have a bit of concern as to how realistic that is going to be. And then the last one, the last point I have, and that has to do with this concept that they're going to take all of the material out of the bottom of the existing Gilkinson drain that's going to be filled in and haul it over to the new channel that's being dug. So it's like cleaning out a ditch, but when you're done, you put some of the material back in again. And I personally have never encountered that concept, that you would clean the ditch out. So I think there's a lot of logistics that are going to have to be worked out, and again, I don't know how practical it's going to be. And then we also have a concern, does that mean that that's what's going to happen from this point forward when the drain is maintained? So you have to clean out the drain, you have to take whatever is considered stony or gravelly material and then put it back in the drain again after you've cleaned it out. So we have a bit of concern there, and I think the specifications need to be tightened up a little bit, because one of the things that'll have to happen is the channel needs to be overdug. So you're going to have to compensate for whatever you're going to put back in, so when you put the material back in, you're at your design grade, because that's the objective of this whole exercise. So there's one spot in your specifications in section A9 where it talks about overdigging the channel, but I think you need to make sure that that references in A3, A5, and A7, which is the part where the contractor is going to look for direction when he goes to dig the ditch, so that they understand that they have to overdig it by 4 to 6 inches. So we have a great deal of concern about that whole concept of how it's going to work. And if you have any, general comments, Jeremy, that would be appreciated, and anything you can provide to these questions, and I can provide you these questions after the meeting, would help to satisfy my brother and myself, so that we wouldn't necessarily need to consider an appeal to the Drainage Tribunal if we're not satisfied with the content of the engineer's report. And the other thing I would point out, we're doing all of this work for 1,500 meters of channel to make good fish habitat, and this channel is like 11 kilometers long. And I don't know how significant that's going to be at the bottom end, but as I said, it does need to go through. And then my brother is, of course, not at all satisfied with the way the cost has been apportioned, but I explained to him that that's not something we're going to get into it tonight, but I will give you a heads up, Jeremy, that we will be appealing to the Court of Revision on the assessments and the way in which the cost has been apportioned. But in closing, if you could comment on the sod mats and the this transfer of the substrate material from one channel to the other, a general comment, and then I will forward my information to you, and maybe you can give me a more direct answer at that time.
Thank you.
Thank
Jeremy?
you, Mr. Mayor.
So one other thing I'll back up to, thank you for your questions and comments, by the way, John. With regards to, you mentioned about topsoil stripping on the property and that aspect of it, we anticipate, because the majority of the work is on Murray's property, that the contractor will be working very closely with them. We purposely left it a little bit more open about where exactly on the property that is going to be working, because we felt that it makes more sense with Murray deciding where and how to have material moved. And because it's all on his property, that would be the best way to work that. So your request to have the contractor discuss before stripping topsoil or before moving material or the staging of construction, I don't see it being an issue at all for him to be working with the contractor through the process. So, with regards to the sod mats, you asked if I'd used them. I have not personally used them before. I relied on one of our aquatic specialists who's done some of this work before, peeling back the sod, replacing it. One of the reasons that it was requested by DFO and was put into the report was to return the vegetative side slopes in a quick and efficient manner. So personally I've not used them, but going through the process and discussing it and how they're put into place, I feel that that is not a reasonable request, sorry, a request by DFO, and one that we can appease them with. With regards to the substrate removal and replacement, what we were anticipating to have happen is, and that's why there is some extra cost with regards to DFO contained within the report, we anticipate that with regards to substrate salvage, that it will be the stony material, not clean out type material, so it won't be topsoil or spoil that's being removed. It'll be good substrate. And it was part of the requirements through DFO to replace the fish habitat and to mitigate the loss of fish habitat by the fill-in of the channel. So with regards to the over-excavation, like you mentioned, it is stated in the specifications that the contractor is expected to over-excavate. Not expecting that the channel will be lined bank to bank with the substrate. I'm expecting it to be a mixture. So to answer your question with regards to maintenance in the future, I don't expect that it's a 3-meter wide maintenance of it in that aspect of it. I think it'll be a field adjustment that we make happen as we're going through the process, to answer your questions on that. As far as the overall part of the report, but we'll let you know that the first approach that we took with DFO with this drain was explaining that we had approximately, get my numbers right, we had a shorter length of channel that we were losing and a longer length that we were increasing the fish habitat with the Danbrook and the extra length. So overall, our first approach with DFO was saying that there was a net gain here in fish habitat. There's going to be a longer length of channel by the time we're done. With experiences in the past with DFO, with closings of drains in that aspect, usually there's a destruction and total loss of fish habitat. Unfortunately, with the individuals that were dealing with that DFO, they did not see it that way. They said, you're filling in the existing channel, therefore you've lost the fish habitat. Even though you're going to recreate it in the future, it is lost now, and that is why we ended up down the path that we did with them. But we did, at the onset, approach them with the aspect, and we felt our initial opinion with them was, you're not losing fish habitat, you're actually gaining some length, but it wasn't accepted. So.
Thank you.
That'll be our questions for that.
Thank you. Further questions from other landowners at this time? Okay, councillors, do you have questions that you wish to address around this? Councillor Duncan. Microphone.
My first one, Jeremy, is...
Microphone.
First one is to do with the downstream side of line 66, where that sediment buildup is occurring now frequently. That drain, when it makes that bit of a turn there, as it exits the culvert, and it's eating the east bank out, are you going to armor that bank?
Had not planned on it at this time.
Okay.
I plan on just taking the bottom sediment out to get the depth improvement and to get the spoil material that was in the line 66 bridge out.
Okay. I'm just wondering if that's something that should be looked at, because if it's just going to continue to be a problem there with the road and that bank, it's just going to keep filling that in with sediment there and blocking that drain up. So I'm wondering if it's something that should be looked at being done when we're in the process of doing all this work. And my second question was to do with the substrate material. Is there a specification from DFO how much substrate material they're asking to be put in the bottom of this drain? Like, are you going to have to bring material in to if there's not enough in the old drain?
We have a provisional to bring granular substrate in.
Okay.
We had looked at it through the length, was sprinkling it throughout the drain so that we had adequate new base in there to match the existing.
Okay.
I believe the concern that DFO had with it was having I'll call it a clay-like base with a uniform clay base, and they wanted that variety in it, that gravelly cobblestone kind of base.
I just wanted to be sure there was a provision in case you just had to bring extra in. Okay, that's kind of the limit of my questions. I was more concerned with the downstream side of that bridge, knowing the situation with it now.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Duncan. Other questions from councillors at this point? Councillor Behrens.
Yeah, Jeremy, we don't often see such involvement by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and it is a very long list of requirements that they're requiring. I am a little bit curious about the letter of credit. It's quite a substantial amount. And is it Mr. Kunze that has to provide that to the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, or who provides that to ensure that the fish habitat has been put back?
The letter of credit was supplied by the municipality of North Perth.
Okay.
Through the Drainage Act process.
And do we get that back eventually?
The understanding with it is that it's in place to ensure that the works are done.
Okay.
And once the works are in place and deemed acceptable, then the letter of credit is given back.
So someone at some point in time when the drain is finished will come out and view it and decide if we get 50% back or 100% or somewhere in between?
Yes, the process is they have a requirement for us to do a post-monitoring report. So based on, I'm presuming based on that post-monitoring report is when the letter of credit will be returned.
Okay, thank you.
Councillors, any further questions? Okay. So I believe, just checking with the clerk here, then given that where we sit, we can adjourn this public meeting at this time? That's correct. Thank you. So thank you. So we'll call this public meeting adjourned at this point in time. And I'll take note that following this meeting, council will consider a provisional bylaw giving first and second reading, and we will set a court of revision date. Okay, so I have a resolution before me to bring us back into regular council session for consideration. Let me just change the source here so that we can see what's going on. And that resolution reads as follows, that public meetings are now adjourned at 7:45 p.m. and the council reconvene into regular open council. Can I invite a mover for that? Councillor Duncan, thank you. Councillor Rothwell is our seconder. Any discussion or debate? Let's have that vote. Oh, there you are. And that is carried. Thank you. That leaves us with some business to do with regards to the items in the public meetings, plural. I have for consideration under item 4.1 a resolution and bylaw. The resolution reads as follows, that the Council of the Municipality approve site plan application SP 21-2019 submitted by 2459825 Ontario Inc. affecting property described as Lot 7, Plan 44M61 Wallace Avenue South, Listowel Ward, and that Council proceed with the adoption of the bylaw authorizing the Mayor and Clerk to enter into a site plan agreement and have it registered on title of the subject property. Can I invite a mover for this? Councillor Behrens and seconded by Councillor Richardson. Any discussion or debate? Seeing none, let's have the vote. And that is carried. We probably should have had you come back, Dave. I don't know. Do you want to come forward? I mean, there's still next, but I think for 4 point, okay, so you're going to sit out. All right, and then that brings us to the bylaw for 4.1. It reads as follows, that bylaw number 1-2020 being a bylaw to authorize the signing of a site plan agreement with 2459825 Ontario Inc. be introduced, read, and considered read a first, second, and third time, and be finally passed, and the said bylaw be signed by the Mayor and the Clerk and sealed with the seal of the corporation. Can I invite a mover for that? Councillor Duncan, thank you, and Deputy Mayor Callum. Any discussion or debate? Let's have that vote too. And that is carried as well. Thank you. That brings us next to item 4.2. And we have a resolution, a couple of resolutions and a bylaw for this one. So let's deal with them in order. The first is recommended to us that the Council of the Municipality of North Perth will accept the Gilkinson Municipal Drain Realignment 2019 report dated December 9th, 2019, prepared by R.J. Burnside and Associates Limited. Can I invite a mover for that? Councillor Duncan, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Seiler. Any discussion or debate? Seeing no indication of that, let's have that vote. And that is carried. Next up, next in the same matter, that the Council of the Municipality of North Perth will hold the Court of Revision for the Gilkinson Municipal Drain Realignment 2019 on January 27th, 2020 at 6:30 p.m. Can I invite a mover for that? Councillor Duncan, you're good for this tonight. And Councillor Andreessen as our seconder. Any discussion or debate? Seeing none, let's have that vote. And that is carried. And now the bylaw. The bylaw 3-2020 being a bylaw to provide for a drainage works Gilkinson Municipal Drain Realignment 2019 be introduced, read, and considered read a first and second time, and be provisionally adopted, and that the said bylaw be signed by the mayor and the clerk and sealed with a seal of the corporation. Can I invite a mover for that? I'm not even looking over that way this time. Councillor Richardson, thank you, and Councillor Rothwell is our seconder. Any discussion or debate on the bylaw? Seeing none, let's have that vote. And that is carried. Thank you. And we'll invite Councillor, I guess we still have one more. Do we have one more item? Not yet. Okay. So that brings us to agenda item 5.1. The CAO, who is absent tonight, has advised that his department has no reports for this regular meeting. Next up then is 5.2, and for item 5.2.1, I will invite North Perth Clerk Pat Bearfelds to provide us with background on a report for our consideration pertaining to the AC, am I right? Am I close? AC Municipal Drain. Clerk Bearfelds.
So this report is actually just for information, and no action is actually required by North Perth Council. Just working with Scott, our drainage superintendent, we felt it was important that we bring this information to council so that you know what happened to that drainage request. So based on the information that's provided by RJ Burnside and Associates, it is deemed to be impractical to move forward with this drainage request. And in the last paragraph of the letter, it states that report and my notice needed to be sent to the landowners, and that was done last week.
Okay. Council, do you have any questions of the clerk at this time or on this matter? Okay, seeing none, I have a resolution for our consideration that the Council of the Municipality of North Perth receive the report from RJ Burnside and Associates regarding the AC Municipal Drain Enclosure. Can I invite a mover for that? Councillor Duncan. And Councillor Seiler, thank you. Any discussion or debate? Seeing none, let's have that vote. And that's carried. Thank you. Next up then is item 5.2.2, and I'll invite Clerk Bearfelds to walk us through what is a first for me during my tenure here, a request for a creation of a new cemetery. Ms. Bearfelds.
Well, actually, I think it's for me too. At first, this is new. We had to do a lot of research within the Act to look into this. So based on the report that I provided with you, you'll note that North Perth Council, previous council, did entertain the planning requirements for these lands back in 2017. And the bylaw was adopted by North Perth Council, allowing the zoning to be changed from agriculture to the institutional zone. Part of establishing a cemetery is then that they come forth to the municipality asking for approval to proceed with the cemetery. And that is what the request is before you tonight. Based on the fact that it's council's wish whether or not they'd like to proceed with a public meeting or just go with the publication in the local newspaper and on the municipal website. But that's council's wish. Our recommendation tonight, based on the fact that North Perth did spend a lot of time on this application previously and decided to go forth with the zoning, knowing that it was going to be a cemetery, I felt comfortable putting forth that resolution. But it certainly is council's decision tonight.
Okay, councillors, before we get to the resolution then, any questions of Clerk Bearfelds on this matter?
Just
Council-
unfortunately, I did not provide you with this drawing, but Councillor Andreessen brought it to our attention. So on the screens, it may give you a better idea where this property is located.
Great, thank you. I saw Councillor Seiler's hand raised.
Just for some confirmation, how does this, what happens if there's a change of property here with this church, and they've got the cemetery with burials in it, and they happen to sell the church or move on? What happens with the cemetery?
Well, again, in the Act, there's quite a detailed procedure for that. But this now is actually not just owned by the property. This is owned by it's part of the Elmdale Old Order Mennonite congregation that's going to be looking after this. But if there's something happens that does cease to exist, there is a procedure. And we've dealt with this actually with the Donegal Cemetery. That's what I thought. We've already dealt with that once with the municipality. That one we do have experience with.
So then the transactions can be.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, I think what the clerk is saying is that there is an exit strategy afforded by the statute, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Other questions at this time? Okay, before I read the resolution, the clerk pointed out that we have an option here. We could hold a public meeting as opposed to publishing a decision in the newspaper. Does anyone feel really compelled by the idea of holding a public meeting at this point on this matter? Seeing the right kind of nods in the room, then let's have the resolution. We'll put it on the floor for our consideration. That the Council of the Municipality of North Perth approves the request from David Horst to establish a cemetery on property described as part of Lot 36, Concession 5, Elma Ward, North Perth. And further, that the Council of the Municipality of North Perth directs staff to send a copy of the decision to Mr. David Horst and the registrar. And further, that the decision will be published in the local newspaper. Can I invite a mover for that? Councillor Johnston, thank you, and seconded by Councillor Rothwell. Any further discussion or debate? Seeing none, let's have that vote. And that is carried. Thank you. Thank you, Clerk. That brings us to item 5.3. We have no reports indicated tonight from our interim manager of recreation. That thus brings us to item 5.4, and I'll note some councillors are departing at this point due to their declared pecuniary interest conflicts. Are there any questions about our report on accounts at this time? Councillor Rothwell.
Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor. I had put later today some comments through to Francis Hale, our treasurer, regarding a couple of matters, and one deals specifically with the accounts on our tables, just in terms of how the bridge work on line 81 was both on the administration side as well as on the public works capital side. So I've put that request in to staff regarding how these two items had been allocated to both the public works capital as well as the administration side. So I expect that we'll have an answer to that here shortly. And the last one was just on the accounts, was dealing with a firm name that I hadn't seen before regarding there's a firm name. So anyways, I'm sure I'll get that information from staff.
Okay, thank you. I don't know, Mr. Couch, do you have any information that would bear on Mr. Rothwell's first question?
Probably summarize it with the Director of Finance then.
Okay,
Thank you. Appreciate that.
great. Okay, so we'll await Fran's response to you on that one. Thank you. So I have a resolution for our consideration that the following summary of accounts be received by council for information. The total is $1,765,000, $547.59. Can I invite him over? Councillor Richardson, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Andreessen. Any questions or comments before the vote? Seeing none, let's have the vote. Let me switch to sources here. And That is carried. If you'd invite our colleagues to return, that would be appreciated. Thanks, Councillor Anstead. We have we have no reports indicated tonight from our Manager of Environmental Services. So that brings us to item 5.6, and specifically item 5.6.1, we have a report from staff pertaining to recommendations from the Cemetery Board for a revision to the fee schedule. I'll invite Manager of Operations Lyndon Couch to provide us with an overview. Welcome, Lyndon.
Thank you, Mayor Kasenberg, members of council. The annual meetings on the budget were held through the Cemetery Board, and we have looked at overall operational costs, as well as the potential of increases, and in review and in concert with the Director of Finance and comments last year about the sustainability of operations, we looked at a higher increase, and that was discussed at board. And what was recommended in the next year, there's some specifics here as to what our increases have been around the 6% level over the past few years. We're recommending a 10% increase in the rates that are on the left columns of the first two blocks, and they're represented in the schedule that is attached. So again, it's a 10% increase in the rates for services prescribed at the cemetery, and that's what's in front of you for discussion for next year. I would say that we did look at a 5-year plan. The board did not want to recommend the full 5 years, but we're looking at the numbers that will be produced and the revenue produced from this, and look at how we project it over 5 years, hoping to make the operations a little more sustainable.
Okay. Any questions or comments on the report for Mr. Couch at this point? Seeing no indication of that, I have a resolution for our consideration that reads as follows: that the Council of the Municipality of North Perth proceed to approve the proposed amendments to the cemetery fees effective January 7th, 2020. Can I invite a mover for that? Councillor Anstead, thank you, and seconded by Councillor Andreessen. Any discussion or debate? Seeing none, let's have the vote. And that is carried. Thank you. Next up is item 5.6.2. For this item, staff has recommended the continuance of appointments of 2 engineering firms involved with capital projects. Are there any questions for Mr. Couch at this time on that? Seeing none, let's bring up the vote for this. Oh, I guess I need to read it. That would be helpful if I did that first. That the Council of the Municipality of North Perth continue to procure the services of the following firms for the respective projects, including tendering and project administration: GM Blue Plan Inc. for Albert Avenue Storm Reconstruction, and BM Ross Limited for Kincaid Street intersection improvements and Line 84 reconstruction. Can I invite a mover for that? Councillor Andreessen, thank you, and seconded by Councillor Rothwell. Appreciate it. Any discussion? Councillor Rothwell?
Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor. Just one question through to our staff here. There's no mention of line 81 for those additional works as well. Was a specific exclusion for that, or is there no additional work expected? I mean, the report talks about it, but the recommendation doesn't. Talks about line 84, but not line 81, the bridge.
Thank you. Yeah, I titled it Capital Update as well as Engineering Services. The engineering services that were procured for the bridge were part and parcel of the entire process. So we didn't need to come back and talk about that. It's expected the GM Blue Plan will take this from the cradle to the grave and complete it with us.
Good. Just want to make sure that we weren't forgetting anything, but I appreciate the update, and I'm saddened to see that we're now looking at June and perhaps later. So.
Yeah.
Okay. I believe we have a motion on the floor that has been moved and seconded for the appropriate appointments. Let's have that vote. And that is carried. Thank you. That brings us to item 6 on our agenda. For item 6.1, councillors, are there any reports you would like to ask of staff? Councillor Rothwell.
Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I'd like to request a report from staff regarding to assess the possibility of no longer requiring public meetings for fourplex dwellings and the potential for council to delegate its approval authority for site plan agreements for fourplexes. And again, my reason for this is we've had many public meetings on fourplexes, and we've had few or none of members of the public in attendance regarding these matters. And really, from a public involvement standpoint, there's no ability to appeal any decision of this council. It's only a possible appeal through to the LPAT by the property owner. So I just, if council agrees, I'd like to request a report from staff regarding an assessment of the possibility to no longer require public meetings on fourplex dwellings and the potential for council to delegate its approval authority for site plan agreements for fourplexes.
All right. I believe we need that to be in a motion for that, so I'll consider that moved by Councillor Rothwell. Can I invite a seconder for that? Councillor Behrens, thank you. Just as an aside, certainly there have been significant conversations about delegated authority in a broader perspective with regards to planning matters. And that no doubt will come forward. I believe as well, we are considering organizing a specific session on planning, and part of that, beyond the training part, will be to have some discussion about exactly those kind of matters and things like design guidelines and so forth. So more to come on the planning file, but I think this is quite timely, and thank you for that. Any questions or comments? We have a motion on the floor. Danette, you've got it trapped. All right, let's have that vote. And that is carried. Thank you. Any further reports to be requested? Councillor Behrens.
Yes, I'd like to request staff to, and I believe they'd have to probably get it from the county, talking about surplus farmhouse severances. We're not necessarily here in North Perth aware of everything that has occurred in the county since the passing of the ability to have a surplus farmhouse severances. I was just wondering if it was possible to get a full report, and I'm really looking for the amount that have occurred, but also the land base that have occurred with them. So you understand, Pat, you know, they severed 2.1 acres or 3.5 acres. I believe you have to go to the county for that. There is no timeline that I require it. It would be nice to have the information, but...
Sure. Okay, so why don't we put that on the floor, or does Councillor Duncan have material information before we put a resolution on the floor?
Yeah, I will forward Pat what she needs, and she can forward it to the rest of council. I have the report.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Okay. So do you want to enter this as a resolution of record, Councillor Behrens, or?
Well, I would like an updated report, so
let's...
like completion to December 31st,
yeah, so
we
county
should
would
know.
have to produce another report. The one we have is, I think, ends, it's August or September it was up till.
But that, I mean, that would be a start.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So does council wish to sort of grant its consent to this, or is this because there is some documentation already available, at least in part? Should we have a resolution to sort of ask county? I think so. Councillor Behrens, you're prepared to move that, I assume. Yes. Seconded by Councillor Johnston. Thank you. Any discussion, further discussion or debate on that one? Let's have a vote on that. And that's carried as well. Any further requests for reports, staff? Councillor Rothwell.
Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor. Through you. Now, this isn't necessarily a report from staff. However, it's related to our last comment. And again, Councillor Duncan wasn't at the 2 meetings ago where we were talking about the concern regarding approval of a surplus farmhouse severance here in North Perth, which this council recommended that it not or be reduced in size. Land Division Committee did approve the slight reduction, but not the full reduction, which North Perth Council had requested. I'm wondering if Councillor Duncan, that sits on Land Division Committee, would provide this council with reports on North Perth applications which council or Land Division Committee has dealt with. And the reason why I'm asking this question is that so that we understand in a timely fashion the decisions that Land Division Committee is making, and as to whether or not the North Perth Council's recommendation to Land Division Committee has in fact been upheld or addressed or and so on. That's the reason why I'm asking. And again, that's not from a staff perspective, but I'm just wondering if Councillor Duncan would be willing to provide that because Land Division Committee does meet on a monthly basis.
Thank you for raising that. Actually, it was something that I was proposing to raise tonight, just briefly in this section of the meeting. Our procedure bylaw actually provides or allows for reports from council members who are serving on other bodies. And it's not something that we've taken advantage of during my term, but given the queries that we had a couple weeks ago about Land Division's actions and so forth, I thought it would be appropriate for us to invite the clerk to add that line item back to our agendas so that we see it and we have the opportunity at that point then to have councillors who wish to make a report on such matters of interest to this council, representing this council or this municipality in other forums, to get back to us. So I think that's part of the solution set here. What I'm trying to avoid, I think, is making it too onerous for people. I don't think written reports necessarily are going to help us unless a councillor wants to have minutes or documentation from that committee entered in as materials to support this. But generally, I'd rather keep this at the verbal level largely at this point unless council has significant objection.
That was going to be kind of my question. How much detail does this council want from me with regards to these decisions?
Right. So
just the decision? Or...
Right. Councillor Rothwell, go ahead.
Well, I believe that what we had talked about at council 2 meetings ago was at least the understanding as to whether or not the recommendation of this council had been brought forward and upheld by the North Perth Council member that sits on Land Division Committee, for example, so that we can certainly understand the reason why recommendations from this council to on that particular matter to approve it. However, to reduce the size in order in compliance with the views that were shared between the county planner on the file as in terms of area, as well as the majority of council to see reduced size. And that's the reason why the matter, I've thought about it a fair bit in terms of how we can address it. And frankly, a notice of decision of Land Division Committee on this one would not have indicated the matter in terms of what we were anticipating in terms of the reduced area. The notice of decision said that the application was approved and that it had certain information, but there's no report photo that shows the reduced area or anything like that. So that was the issue of concern on this one, and it's not I don't think it's, from my perspective, that we're looking for something particularly onerous. The majority of these files are relatively straightforward. It's just a matter that in situations where the recommendation of this council is looking at some change or modification, that we'd like to have an idea on that. And again, it's only on North Perth files I think that this council is concerned about with respect to recommendations as to whether or not they were upheld or not, and then that's my view.
Any further comment to Deputy Mayor Kellum?
Yes, sir, you, Mayor Kasenberg. To add to that, so let's use Matt, for example. There are minutes taken, Matt? So can they not be emailed right after to you and then you forward them to us? And if there are any questions? We can request them, though. Like I sit on, for example, Perth Museum, it gets sent, and then they're in our file, and if there's any questions, they ask me.
I think there's some wisdom to this. I had certainly asked the county clerk if she would make a steady stream of county council minutes available, and I don't know that has happened. So the problem is not on our side in distributing the information. The problem is coming from the county and their failure to deliver that material in a timely fashion. So my interesting question here, Deputy Mayor, is whether or not the minutes of Land Division would contain enough information about the discussion and debate to actually fill us in on, not just that they rejected a recommendation of North Perth Council, but that they, why? What was the rationale? What happened in terms of what transpired in the room at that point? At the same time, I don't want to create, as I said, an onerous responsibility for any of us to be drafting lengthy reports on our own personal experiences in these committees in which we represent North Perth, unless there's strong will to do so. And I'm not wild about the idea of creating work for people. So, Clerk Bearfields, did you want to weigh in?
We've been taught most recently that when we take as minute takers that we're to do it without verbatim. So meaning taking away a lot of, and that your very minutes that we provide, there's often more conversation, but that's the way we've been taught to just put the facts on the table. That way we're not making any comment that Councillor Behrens has said something that was not necessarily what she said. So it's just a protection for everyone. So I'm not sure exactly how we're going to get more detail, because if we were to request those minutes from Land Division, I don't know that they're going to be a lot different than what North Perth provides.
Right. I think, when I think about the issue that Councillor Rothwell has raised, I think the concern there is that certainly it was clear that Land Division did not opt to follow or heed the recommendation of this council. And I suspect that that's one of those red flags that you would like this council to know about, that when Land Division has said, no, we're not listening to you, that we know about it in the aftermath and not just see sort of a sterile notice of judgment or whatever that comes back from Land Division that says, here's the final parcel. And in fact, if I'm following the bouncing ball here, and I've never really asked this question before, but my guess is that the package that comes back, it doesn't actually include an updated site sketch or site plan, or so then you really have very little basis on which to understand the decision in the absence of sort of a followed up sketch of the site in some ways. And so, that's where we find ourselves torn, because the documentation that is available probably from the county is not that informative, per the clerk's comments about why. And we have our own eyes and ears in theory there that can come back and at least tell us what transpired. I think the other interesting question in this, and I'm sorry to ramble a little bit, but there is an interesting question here, and that is that if this council has elected to make a recommendation to Land Division, is our council's representative our council's representative, or is that person a county councillor serving on the Land Division committee with the consent of county council? And so there certainly may be times when any member of this council serving on external bodies may disagree with the advice of council. They may have voted against it, whatever. And what I'm concerned about is I don't know how we resolve that matter. When county council receives our formal guidance through letter, that North Perth Council made this decision, does that mean that our North Perth representative who's on that body has to vote that way? And I'm not sure what the answer to that is. I'm kind of leaving that on the table as the monkey that's going to jump around the room for a little while. But anyway, I think it's worthy of some more consideration, because I certainly can appreciate that there may be times where any of us could be put in a position where we have a personal disagreement and we're serving at a different level, and we're not really there as a result of being a North Perth councillor, but we're there because we're a county councillor serving at the will of county council, for example. But Councillor Behrens, I'd love to hear any history on this and thoughts.
That's been a debate that's been going on for over 20 years. So if you can ever find the end to it. My personal belief is all three of you are representatives from North Perth. And if North Perth Council has made a decision, you are obligated to follow that decision, irregardless of your personal opinion. That's my own person, because you are at county council because you are here. It's not something extra that you're doing. Well, it is extra, sorry. Yeah. It's not something completely different. You're doing it because of your position on North Perth Council. The one thing, I don't think that getting the minutes is going to help us, because it's not going to get here in a timely manner, if ever. And even if it does get here, it's not going to say what we want. And that's kind of why I wanted the report from the county, because I would be extremely curious as to how many times Land Division has made a decision and went against the member municipality. Some might refer to it as the lower tier. So how many times have these things occurred in other areas of the county where they did not take the local council's recommendation. I would be curious to know that. Mr. Rothwell can tell you, or Councillor Rothwell can tell you that we're kind of learning this surplus farmhouse severance. We've been at it for a little bit, but it would be nice to go back and do a little bit of history and find out, because county council does have the control of land division, whether we like it or we don't like it. The problem is, historically, knowing the reason why they took it in-house, because it used to be volunteers, was because the local municipalities' wishes were not being met. That's why they took it in-house.
It's an interesting situation, that's for sure. I believe Mr. Gundram's report that Matt may have alluded to in terms of availability of some information does do exactly as you've asked. It goes across the county, across the member municipalities, so that you can see where there were favorable judgments on behalf of the municipality and unfavorable ones. And also sort of how the county planner's recommendations were handled, whether they were accepted in whole or in part or rejected. So I think there is that report, although as I think Matt said, it might end the end of September or something like that. That might be the effective date. But I do believe it goes back several years. Yeah, I think so. Councillor Rothwell.
Just thanks very much, Mr. Mayor. My only two comments are this. One, in terms of the minutes, I agree with Councillor Behrens. Just like us, the minutes are not the minutes until they're approved by the decision-making body. So you'll see some drafts and so on, which are not particularly helpful based on true minutes. They will only deal specific with the decision that's made. There'll be no note or effect taken to that. So I don't think that's particularly helpful. But given the time frames and so on, I think my second comment is that in terms of however the county council members vote on matters and so on, that's their decision to make. I'm not going to tell you how to make it. However, if you do something that's contrary to this council's wishes, I think this council better know. And I think that's your responsibility to tell this council. And then I'm not looking for a defense or anything, but at least we will know as a council that you chose to make that decision. But then this council can make a decision as to whether or not to appeal that matter on the basis of the recommendations that was made. And I think that's the critical issue that we found here in dealing with that matter in North Perth that we discussed at our second or third last meeting, that it was out of our hands. The time had already elapsed, and frankly, no one knew till the zoning bylaw amendment came and said, oh my gosh, how come this area is so large? That was the discussion that was at this council, and frankly, it was a surprise to many or most of us that the recommendation of this council was not followed, which I think was one of the first ones, as I can recall, that we dealt with. So that's the reason why I think it's appropriate that we hear comment from you, Councillor Duncan, currently sitting on that division committee, that you would at least give us that opportunity if there's going to be that change to the agenda. I think that would be helpful for us all, and hopefully we can move forward on that basis.
Okay. And as I said, I think in principle, the procedure bylaw has a provision that allows for councillor reports. So I think we do have that opportunity, and whether they are written or verbal, I think depends on the circumstances. Land division is perhaps of particular interest to this council at this time. I will take note that, as I understand it, with regards to a matter that we dealt with a few weeks ago, the Dunnigan property, 6 lots to 4, that land division struck this council's additional contingent options from its consideration. So it might be worth the council knowing that there is some disagreement apparently between land division and the approach that this council had elected to pursue on that matter. Matt, do you have anything more on that one?
I'm not sure how to go about. Land division didn't feel that those matters were something for land division debate. Their job was to just deal with the severance. That was land division's decision on that. That's all I can really say to it, right?
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Interesting place, land division these days, apparently. All right. So if any councillor has reports of committees or external representations that they wish to share at this point, then you're welcome to do so. If not, just take note that we will add the slot on the minutes, the agenda moving forward, so that there's the opportunity to present. Councillor Rothwell.
Well, just while we're on council matters, again, sorry about that. So this council dealt with a public meeting, or county council held a public meeting, or 3 representatives, and the recommendation then went through from North Perth Council on the matter east of Donegal, dealing with the proposed expansion of the church and school and recreational fields. Did county council make a decision on that yet, or not?
No, I don't think it came forward.
Okay. I just want to know, just given the time frames and so on. So I appreciate that. And again, that gets back to the issue in terms of, having some comments, because I mean, we don't always have the opportunity to see that. So thanks very much.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Seiler, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. So just a question to Councillor Duncan. These land division, are they public meetings?
Yep.
People can go there
Yep.
to listen.
That's Doug. He was in attendance for one.
That might be an option.
Thank you. Yeah, okay. With regards to agenda item number 7, we have received no items of correspondence beyond that which was already shared for council's disposition. That brings us to agenda item number 8, which allows council to consider and enact bylaws. Turning to item 8.1, council is asked to amend the existing bylaw number 40-2015, the North Perth procedural bylaw, by way of an amending bylaw number 2-2020. These are subsequent to a resolution approved during an early meeting of council. Pat, do you have any comments before we act? You don't have to, but if you have some, please feel free.
I think that the amending bylaw pretty well dictates exactly what was changed. I did leave in a lot of the conversation and what's included in the bylaw dealing with delegations. I just thought it was of good interest to keep it there. Not every clause there was changed. Basically what was changed was the fact that now they need to inform me by Tuesday and have their information to me by Wednesday at lunchtime. The forms that people fill out in order to request a delegation have already been revised based on tonight's approval. Then that will be changed on the website, so people will be made aware of that. The only addition that I made and took it upon to add to your amendment bylaw tonight was the fact that we do now live stream our council meetings, and that should be part of the procedural bylaw as well. And that was the only additional thing that I've added under recording equipment.
Great. Any questions for Clerk Bearfelds on this one? Okay, seeing none, I have a resolution for consideration that bylaw number 2-2020, being a bylaw to amend the North Perth procedural bylaw, be introduced, read, and considered read a first, second, and third time, and be finally passed, and that the said bylaw be signed by the mayor and the clerk and sealed with the seal of the corporation. Can I invite a mover? Councillor Anstead, thank you. And seconded by Councillor Duncan. Any discussion or debate? Seeing none, let's have that vote. And that is carried. Thank you. And for item 8.2, council is asked to enact an amendment to bylaw number 160-2015, the so-called fees and licenses bylaw, by way of amending bylaw number 4-2020, with the effect to change schedules of fees. Any comments on this one, Pat?
Just reminding council that the resolution was adopted by council at your last council meeting in 2019 regarding the administrative fees, and that was brought forth by the Director of Finance. Council did approve that, so that was just included in tonight's amending bylaw, along with the presentation by Lyndon Couch.
Great, thank you. Any further questions for Ms. Bearfelds? Okay, Councillor Richardson looks like he's ready to move it, so let me just read it out. That might be helpful, right? Bylaw number 4-2020, being a bylaw to amend the North Perth rates and fees bylaw, be introduced, read, and considered read a first, second, and third time, and be finally passed. And said bylaw be signed by the mayor and the clerk and sealed with the seal of the corporation. Councillor Richardson has moved it, seconded by Councillor Andreessen. Any further discussion or debate? Seeing none, let's have that vote. And that is carried. Thank you. And now we have one more, item 8.3. This is a bylaw that pertains to drainage works. And we're asked to enact a bylaw for that. Any comments from staff on this one? Anybody? Okay, so let me read the resolution of the record that bylaw number 124-2019, being a bylaw to provide for a drainage works B drain of drain number 59 municipal drain be introduced, read, and considered read a third time, and be finally passed, and that the said bylaw be signed by the mayor and the clerk and sealed with the seal of the corporation. Councillor Johnston will move that. Councillor Duncan as our seconder. Thank you. Any discussion or debate on this third reading? Seeing none, let's have that vote. And that is carried as well. That brings us to agenda item 9 tonight. Are there any notices of motion from councillors attending this meeting? Seeing none, that brings us to item 10 on our agenda. For item 10.1, are there any announcements that would be of benefit to our community or that reflect well on North Perth at this time? Well, I'll take the opportunity to point out that the Atwood Lions Steak Night is approaching on January 25th, and I just happen to have tickets. Oh, the ticket prices are $30. Any further announcements? Clerk Berfelds.
I don't necessarily have an announcement, but I do have some questions for North Perth Council. So this will be an other. So you all received an email on Saturday morning regarding the upcoming AMO conference to be held in August. I did receive a quick message from Councillor Anstead asking tomorrow morning the housing opens at 10 o'clock. And for you that know that that's difficult always to get rooms. So if anyone is interested and would like a room booked tomorrow morning, would you please let me know that you've got interest in attending that? Not that there won't be housing later, but in order to get into the actual facility where the conference is being held, it's nice, and that's will open up tomorrow at 10. So good. And secondary, and following up with a conversation we've had tonight in regards to planning, Sean and I were having conversation this afternoon about he's very close to having the presentation and what he'd like to bring to North Perth Council prepared. And our question is that we already know that January and February are very busy months with budget as well as conferences, family day, and so on. So we do not necessarily have set aside a council orientation evening. The first one that you have is actually the last 2 Mondays of March. So our question tonight to you is, do you want to wait until then, or would you like to set aside and come up with a Wednesday tonight that you would like to consider?
I see she's striving to be Miss Popularity tonight.
Yeah.
Okay. Councillors, any thoughts on where you'd like to go? Councillor Seiler?
Wait till March.
Wait till March?
Do we ever get any calendars anymore?
I've got one. Matt has one. Okay, so we're shooting for a meeting in March, I think.
Request is,
I
and that's
think that
fine. Just
I'm sort of seeing enough heads nod that
yes, it's a 7 o'clock. It's already on your schedule. It's already slated. We didn't know if you'd want something earlier, that we'd have to establish another date. That's fine.
and that would be a fairly dedicated meeting, I assume.
Only to planning.
Right. Wonderful. Okay, thank you. Anything else from staff on these announcements? Okay, that brings us to agenda item 11. We have no matters tonight to consider in a closed session of council this evening, and therefore we have nothing to report out on from a closed meeting session. I see 3 colleagues departing. Let the minutes note that. Council, as a mandated good practice, acts near the end of its meeting agenda to confirm all of its actions and business of its meeting through what is called the confirmatory bylaw. I have the draft of that bylaw number 5-2020, which reads as follows. That bylaw number 5-2020 being a bylaw to confirm generally previous actions of the Council of the Municipality of North Perth be introduced, read, and considered read a first, second, and third time and be finally passed, and that the said bylaw be signed by the mayor and the clerk and sealed with the seal of the corporation. Can I invite a mover? Councillor Rothwell, seconded by Councillor Andreessen. Thank you. Any discussion or debate? Seeing none, let's have that vote. And that is carried. Thank you. Our colleagues are being returned to the chamber. I have this distinct feeling, remembering our meeting before the holidays, that the phrase "out like a lion, in like a lamb" applies at this very point, because this meeting is fairly short and effective, it would appear. I have, before we adjourn, is there any further business that councillors wish to draw to the chair's attention? Seeing none, I have a motion to adjourn that reads as follows. The council meeting adjourns at 8:35 p.m. to meet again for general council business on Monday, January 13th, 2020 at 7 p.m. Can I invite him over? Deputy Mayor Kellum, seconded by Councillor Seiler. Let's have the vote. And that motion is carried. This council will meet again in regular council meeting on Monday, January 13th, 2020. Until that date, the meeting is adjourned.